"You need to get out of here, Miley. The storm's coming," Tony called from behind the pizzeria counter, his voice carrying over the clatter of pans and the low rumble of thunder. "Okay, thanks," Miley Carter replied, powering down her laptop. She always liked working at Tony's pizzeria, keeping their accounts in good standing. Slinging her worn leather backpack over her shoulder, she reached for her trusty, oversized umbrella, Big Blue, a quirky, faded canopy that had sheltered her through many unexpected storms. Miley didn't mind the rain itself. It was the chill of wet clothes clinging to her skin that she hated. "See you in a couple of days," she called, waving as she pushed the door open. The evening air smelled of ozone, thick and heavy. The first raindrops fell in hesitant taps against the pavement. Miley snapped Big Blue open just as a jagged streak of lightning cut across the sky. Her eyes flicked down the street, catching sight of a man leaning against the brick wall of a building a few doors down. At first glance, he looked like any other. Businessman caught without shelter, no umbrella, coat clutched loosely in one hand. But something about him snagged her attention. His shoes, polished, expensive leather. He didn't belong to the neighborhood, not with shoes like those. Miley lowered her gaze quickly. It wasn't her business. She tightened her grip on Big Blue's handle and kept walking, rain speckling around her as the drizzle grew heavier. The sky cracked open. What had been a drizzle turned into a punishing downpour in seconds. The sound swallowed the street, drumming against cars and rooftops. Instinctively, Miley glanced back. The man was no longer standing. He had collapsed, sprawled awkwardly on the sidewalk. "Oh no," she gasped, sprinting toward him, Big Blue wobbling in her grip as she shielded his body from the torrent. Kneeling down, she shook his shoulder. "Hey, can you hear me?" There was no response. His face, striking even in distress, was pale beneath the sheets of rain. His coat slipped from his fingers, forgotten. Thinking fast, Miley pulled off her backpack and slid it carefully under his head, elevating it just enough to stop the rainwater from pooling against his face. Her heart pounded as panic clawed at her chest, but her hands were steady. "Come on, stay with me," she whispered, though she had no idea if he could hear. She fumbled for her phone and dialed 911, shouting over the storm when the operator answered. "Yes, a man collapsed on the corner of 5th and Maple. Please, hurry, he's unresponsive." The operator's calm voice directed her to check for ID, for anything that could help the paramedics when they arrived. Miley hesitated only a moment before reaching into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. Her fingers brushed against a wallet. Inside, she found a driver's license, Richard Lewis. She mouthed the name to herself, committing it to memory. She also spotted a sleek black business card tucked behind the ID. "Lewis and Hawthorne Capital," it read, in embossed silver. Definitely not a neighborhood regular. Clutching the card, she tucked it into her backpack for later. If he survived, she would make sure he knew someone had been there for him. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder as red and blue lights cut through the rain. Relief flooded her chest as the ambulance pulled to a stop beside them. 2 paramedics rushed out, umbrellas forgotten, kneeling beside her and swiftly taking over. "Good job keeping him elevated," one of them said as they worked. "You may have saved him from drowning in runoff." Miley backed up, soaked to the bone, Big Blue trembling in her hand. She watched silently as they loaded Richard Lewis into the ambulance, his still unconscious form swallowed by the sterile glow of emergency lights. As the doors slammed shut, Miley realized her heart was still racing, not just from fear, but from something deeper. Something about the stranger's fall, the way fate had thrown her into his story, felt like the start of something she couldn't quite name. And when the ambulance sped off toward General Hospital, Miley knew she couldn't just walk away. She had his name, she had his card, and she had questions. Miley sat at her kitchen table, hair damp from the storm, clutching a mug of chamomile tea that had already gone cold. She'd changed into dry clothes, soft sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, but her mind refused to settle. The image of Richard collapsing replayed in her thoughts like a haunting loop, his body crumpled against the slick pavement. the pale cast of his face under the rain. She tapped the side of her mug absent-mindedly. He might be at the hospital right now, all alone. That thought gnawed at her. A man dressed that sharply, carrying a card from a capital firm. Surely he had people who cared about him. But then again, wealth and appearances didn't always mean companionship. She knew that truth better than most. Setting her mug aside, Miley grabbed Big Blue from its place by the door. The fabric still smelled faintly of rain and asphalt, but she needed it. If she stayed here, she would worry herself sick. Decision made, she locked up her apartment and caught the late bus toward General Hospital. The ride was quiet, save for the squeal of the brakes and the occasional cough of a fellow passenger. Miley pressed her forehead lightly against the cool glass, watching the city blur by in watery streaks of light. Her pulse quickened as the hospital came into view, its sterile glow a beacon against the storm-dark night. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Miley approached the front desk, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. "Excuse me. Richard Lewis. He was brought in not long ago." The nurse glanced at her, suspicion flickering in her eyes. "And you are?" Miley straightened her shoulders, nerves twisting her stomach. "I'm the one who called 911. I stayed with him until the ambulance arrived." The nurse studied her for a long moment, then softened. "Would you like to see him? He's still in the ER? No visitors have come by yet." Miley blinked. "No one?" "Not so far," the nurse confirmed, already leading her down the hall. "Room 3, on the left." Miley hesitated outside the door, gripping Big Blue like a talisman. It felt strange, walking into the life of a stranger, and yet it also felt necessary. She pushed the door open quietly. Richard lay unconscious, pale against the crisp white sheets. An oxygen mask fitted snugly over his face. Machines beeped steadily, reminding her that life still pulsed inside him, fragile, but fighting. Miley moved closer, her chest tightening. She whispered a small prayer under her breath, fingers brushing the cool metal of the bedrail. "Please, let him wake up." Pulling up a chair, she sat beside him, her voice soft but steady as she began to speak. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I figured it's better than sitting in silence. My name's Miley Carter. I'm an accountant, one of those people who spends hours staring at spreadsheets until the numbers start to blur." She laughed quietly, nervously. "I work at a big corporation, but I also help some of the local businesses with their books. Keeps me grounded, I guess. That's what I was doing when I left Tony's pizzeria tonight, wrapping up a little project." Her eyes flicked to his still face, hoping for even the slightest twitch of recognition. "Nothing. You know, I lose track of time when I'm working. Sometimes 3-4 hours go by before I even realize it. If the storm hadn't come, I probably would have kept sitting there chasing numbers. But then you—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I guess we were both lucky it rained." The room hummed softly with the machines, each beep a quiet metronome to her words. Miley leaned forward, her hand hovering near his, but not quite touching. "Please, wake up," she whispered, voice thick with unspoken worry. Her shoulders slumped as silence pressed in again, but she stayed, anchored to the chair, her umbrella propped faithfully against the wall like a silent witness. She didn't know why, but leaving felt impossible. For now, she would be here. For him. The door creaked open, and Miley quickly straightened in her chair, brushing sleep from her eyes. She dozed off sometime past midnight, her head slumped against the armrest. The doctor stepped inside, his expression calm but purposeful. "You're here for Mr. Lewis?" he asked, glancing at the unconscious figure on the bed. Miley nodded quickly. "Yes, I was the one who found him. Is he going to be all right?" The doctor gave a reassuring smile. "He's stable. Severe dehydration and exhaustion. His body essentially shut down from overwork. We'll be admitting him for a few days so he can properly recover. The medication will keep him resting for the next 48 hours. Miley exhaled slowly. the tension in her chest loosening for the first time. "So, he'll be okay?" "He will," the doctor confirmed. "But right now, rest is the best medicine. Don't expect him to wake any time soon." With that, the doctor jotted a note on the chart and left as quietly as he had come. Miley sank back into her chair, relief mingling with a strange sense of responsibility. She looked at Richard, his face slack and peaceful beneath the steady rhythm of the monitors. "Rest," she whispered. "You've clearly earned it." She should have left then, gone home, changed, prepared for work. But something rooted her in place. The thought of him waking to an empty room gnawed at her. So she stayed. Hours stretched into the morning light. The hospital room was filled only with the mechanical heartbeat of the monitors and the muted shuffle of nurses checking vitals. No visitors arrived. No phone calls came through. By daylight, Miley finally picked up her phone and called her office. "Yes, it's me. I won't be in today. Something came up." She hesitated, then added, "Actually, I may need a couple of days." Each morning she repeated the routine, sitting by his side, waiting, hoping. By the third day, when still no one had appeared, Miley finally asked the nurse, "Surely the hospital has contact information on file." The nurse shook her head, apologetically. "Nothing listed except his office address. We haven't been able to reach family." That night, determined, Miley pulled out her phone. She typed his name, Richard Lewis, Lewis and Hawthorne Capital, into the search bar. The results came quickly. His polished professional headshot, glowing articles about financial deals, even a mention of him on a most eligible bachelor's list. She clicked the company's number and pressed the phone to her ear. "Lewis and Hawthorne, how may I direct your call?" "Yes," Miley said carefully. "I'm calling about Richard Lewis. He's in the hospital. I think his colleagues should know." Within the hour, the quiet room transformed. People poured in, men in suits, women in sleek dresses, assistants with clipboards. The sterile calm dissolved into murmurs of concern, clipped questions, and sharp orders. And then she arrived, a poised woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair, diamond studs glinting in her ears. Richard's mother. She swept to the bedside, clutching her son's hand with a dramatic sigh. Her eyes flicked briefly to Miley, lingering just long enough to assess and dismiss. "You can go now," she said coolly. No thank you, no acknowledgement. Just dismissal. Miley froze, stung by the sudden erasure. She rose slowly, gripping Big Blue like a shield, and forced a polite nod. Of course. Her chair scraped softly against the tile as she pushed it back. She slipped out of the room quietly, unnoticed among the crowd now circling Richard. In the hallway, Miley paused, pressing her hand against her chest. She told herself it didn't matter. She was just a stranger who happened to be there. Still, the sting of being dismissed without a word of gratitude settled deep. As she stepped back into the stormy evening, one truth weighed heavily on her heart. She had saved Richard Lewis's life, but in his world, she was invisible. Richard lay silent, beneath the hospital's fluorescent glow, machines marking time with their steady beeps. Though unconscious, his presence still commanded the room. The air seemed to bend around him, drawing people in, family, colleagues, those who thrived in his orbit. At the center sat his mother, Eleanor Lewis. Regal in posture and expression, she hadn't let go of his hand since she arrived. Her tailored navy coat hung from her shoulders like armor. Her diamond studs caught the light whenever she shifted, a subtle reminder of her station. "This is what happens when you burn yourself out," she said sharply, her voice a quiet reprimand, to the room at large. "He works himself to the bone, and not one of you bothered to intervene." Across from her, a man in his 40s cleared his throat. Richard's older brother, Michael. Taller, broader, but carrying none of Richard's polish. Michael leaned back in the chair with folded arms. "Don't put this on us, Mother. Richard doesn't listen to anyone. He never has. He's obsessed with being the golden boy." Maybe now he'll finally realize he's not invincible. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Jealousy doesn't suit you, Michael. Michael's lips twisted into a smirk. I'm not jealous, I'm realistic. While he's out there making headlines, I'm the one keeping the family business steady, but of course you only see him. A tense silence fell until a soft voice broke it. Clara, Richard's younger sister, barely 30, with gentle features and a reserved demeanor. She had positioned herself by the window, almost as if she wanted to disappear into the wall. Can't we stop arguing? He's lying there unconscious, and you two are fighting like always. Eleanor turned her sharp gaze on her daughter. Your brother nearly worked himself to death. Do you expect me to sit quietly? Clara glanced at Richard, her expression pinched with worry. I expect us to care about him, not use this as another battle. Michael scoffed, but said nothing more. The colleagues from Lewis and Hawthorne shifted uneasily, exchanging quick glances. Most of them knew better than to interrupt a Lewis family quarrel, but one young associate finally spoke up. Mrs. Lewis, we can arrange for private duty nurses. He'll be cared for around the clock. Eleanor nodded curtly. Do that. He is not to be left unattended. Richard must be protected, his recovery, his reputation, everything. We cannot let anyone think he's weak. The weight of her words settled like a stone. Even here, with her son unconscious, image mattered. Clara lowered her gaze, whispering almost to herself. Maybe that's why he's like this, because he's never allowed to stop. But Eleanor ignored her, too focused on maintaining control. She glanced toward the empty chair by the bed, the one Miley had occupied for 2 nights before being dismissed. For a brief flicker, her jaw tightened. Whoever that young woman had been, she was not part of the story Eleanor intended to write for her son. Richard stirred faintly, his hand twitching beneath hers, but his eyes remained closed. Eleanor tightened her grip, her voice low but firm. You will not let this ruin you, Richard. You will rise from this stronger. We have too much at stake, Michael muttered under his breath. There it is. The empire comes first, even before the man. But Clara, unnoticed in the corner, whispered a different kind of prayer. Just wake up, Richard, please, for yourself, not for them. In the sterile quiet, the Lewis family revealed itself. Ambition wrapped in love, rivalry cloaked in loyalty, and unspoken burdens pressing down on the man unconscious in the bed. And though Richard could not hear them, the battle lines around him had already been drawn. Miley lingered in the hallway long after she'd been dismissed, the echo of Eleanor Lewis's cold words still stinging. She told herself to leave, to go home and close this chapter, but her feet refused to move. Instead, she waited. The stream of family and colleagues eventually thinned, their voices fading down the corridor. When the hallway finally grew quiet, Miley slipped back into Richard's room. The sterile hum felt calmer now, less suffocating. Without the crowd, she eased into the chair she'd claimed those first 2 nights, her umbrella leaning faithfully against the wall. Richard lay as before, still, silent, but she leaned closer anyway. Let's drown out the noise from your family, she whispered, a hint of defiance in her tone. From her bag, she pulled out a small paperback she often carried for bus rides. The cover was worn, its title embossed in pink foil. It was a light, cheesy romance, the kind of story that made her smile when life felt too heavy. She opened it and began to read aloud, her voice soft but steady. The words filled the room, replacing the silence with gentle rhythm. As she read about bumbling declarations of love and ridiculous meet-cutes, she watched his face. Then, so slight she almost missed it, his fingers twitched against the sheet, her breath caught. Richard, she asked softly, leaning forward. His eyes remained closed, his chest rising and falling in the same steady rhythm. But the movement had been real. She smiled faintly, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. That's okay. Don't push yourself. Just relax. Your world will still be here when you're rested." Her voice gentled, coaxing. "The body has spoken. Don't fight it." She returned to the book, reading with more warmth now, as though she were telling him a secret. The chapters unfolded. Kisses under lampposts, improbable proposals, happy endings. Slowly, her own shoulders eased, as though the story soothed them both. Time slipped past unnoticed until the nurse appeared in the doorway. "Visiting hours are over," she said gently. Miley nodded, closing the book. She stood, brushing her hand lightly over the blanket near Richard's arm. "Sleep well," she murmured. As she stepped into the hall, she realized something had changed. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She had become part of his story, whether his family approved or not. 2 days later, Richard Lewis stirred awake. His eyes blinked open against the pale hospital light, every muscle in his body aching with the weight of exhaustion. The first thing he noticed was his family gathered around, his mother seated close, Michael standing stiffly, Clara lingering near the window. "You're awake," Eleanor breathed, her tone a blend of relief and command. "You gave us quite a scare." Richard swallowed, his throat dry, his voice hoarse. "There was a woman." His brow furrowed as fragments of memory surfaced. A gentle voice, laughter spilling from pages of a book, the faint scent of rain clinging to her. "She was here, reading to me." Michael exchanged a look with Eleanor before speaking flatly. "You must have been dreaming. No one's been here but us." Eleanor's hand tightened over his. "Hallucinations are common after exhaustion and medication. You imagined it, darling. Focus on your recovery." Richard frowned, confusion stirring inside him. He could feel her presence lingering, in his mind, as real as the sheets beneath him. He knew he hadn't conjured her out of thin air. Still, he was too weak to argue. Later that evening, when the family finally left for the night, Richard shifted against the pillows, restless. The new nurse on duty, a kind-eyed woman in pale blue scrubs, came to check his vitals. "Excuse me," Richard rasped. "Can I ask you something?" She smiled. "Of course. There was someone who sat with me, a woman. Was she real, or was I just imagining it?" The nurse's smile deepened, knowing, "Oh, she was real, the lady who saved you. She's been here every night after your family leaves, sat by your bed, reading out loud, wouldn't let you be alone." Richard's chest tightened. He trailed off, the realization dawning. His family had deliberately hidden her from him, erased her presence as though she never existed. The nurse adjusted his blanket gently. "Sometimes the people who love us most don't always tell us the whole truth. But believe me, she was here." Richard closed his eyes, her voice echoing in his memory, soft, warm, stubbornly kind. She wasn't a dream. She was real. And now, more than ever, he wanted to know her name. That evening, Miley returned to the hospital with her paperback tucked under her arm and Big Blue resting against her shoulder. She'd rehearsed what she'd say if Richard was awake. Something simple, something kind. She didn't want thanks. She only wanted to be sure he was okay. But just as she stepped toward his room, a tall man in an expensive suit intercepted her. His eyes were sharp, his tone clipped. "Miss Carter, the family has requested that you stay away from Richard from now on." Miley froze, her grip tightening around her book. "Why? I haven't done anything but sit with him." "That may be true," the man replied smoothly, "but this is a private matter. The Lewis family prefers to handle things themselves." He gestured firmly toward the elevators. "Thank you for your concern." The dismissal cut deeper than she expected. Miley stood there for a heartbeat, then forced herself to nod. Without a word, she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the sterile corridor. Inside the room, Richard waited. The minutes stretched long into hours. every sound from the hallway stirring anticipation, but she never came. By morning, frustration gnawed at him. When the same nurse returned for rounds, Richard asked quietly, "Did I fall asleep and miss her again?" The nurse hesitated, then sighed. "No, you didn't miss her. She came, but the family told her she wasn't allowed to enter your room." The words landed like a blow. Richard's jaw tightened, heat rising in his chest. His own family, his blood, had barred the woman who had saved him, who had kept vigil when no one else had been there. Anger simmered, sharp and bitter, twined, with regret for not having the strength to intervene sooner. By mid-morning, his family swept in again. Eleanor entered first, her composure flawless, her tone already tuned for damage control. "Richard, darling, the press has been inquiring. We've prepared a statement, simple, polished. It emphasizes that you were overworked but are now recovering. It's important that we control the narrative." Michael chimed in, arms crossed. "You should be grateful. We're protecting your reputation. Investors get skittish when they smell weakness." Richard's hands curled into fists beneath the blanket. Their voices filled the room, clashing against the silence he craved. The same silence that had been so easily filled by the sound of her voice reading a story meant only for him. Enough. His voice cut through their chatter like glass. All heads turned toward him. He raised himself against the pillows, his expression firm. "I need time to myself. All of you, leave." Eleanor blinked, taken aback. "Richard, you can't mean—" "I said leave." His tone was steady, cold, leaving no room for debate. "This isn't about PR or business. This is about me. Get out." For once, even Eleanor faltered. Michael muttered under his breath, but obeyed. Clara lingered for a moment, sympathy flickering in her eyes before she, too, followed. The door shut behind them, sealing the quiet back into the room. Richard exhaled, the anger still simmering beneath his ribs, but also something else, a resolve. He would find her. The woman they had tried to erase was the only one who had truly been there. Richard wasn't a man who left things undone. A week into his recovery, after being released from the hospital, he hired a private investigator to do what his family had tried to prevent: find the woman who had saved him. The detective called that same evening, his voice brisk but certain. "Her. Name is Miley Carter, accountant, local. I'll send you the file." Within moments, Richard had everything he needed. Address, phone number, even the detail that she favored working late nights in Tony's pizzeria. 7 days later, fully rested and determined, Richard stood on the steps of her apartment building. He hesitated for a brief moment, then knocked. When Miley opened the door, her face lit up in surprise before breaking into a smile. "Richard, you're—" She exhaled with relief. "You're doing better." "I am," he said softly. "And I came to apologize for my family, for the way they treated you." He paused, then added with a rueful smile, "My mom can be a little too much at times." Miley tilted her head, crossing her arms playfully. "A little too much? That's a nice way of putting it." They both laughed, the tension between them breaking like sunlight after rain. Richard's eyes softened as he leaned against the doorframe. "Can we have dinner?" "My way of saying thank you." Miley arched an eyebrow. "Dinner, huh? On one condition. You explain how you ended up on your deathbed. That story isn't going to vanish with a plate of pasta." He chuckled, shaking his head. "That might take a week's worth of dinners." "Then I'm game if you are." Their laughter blended, easy and unforced, carrying the promise of something more than gratitude. "Are you free tomorrow?" Richard asked. "Yes," Miley replied without hesitation, "and I know just the place. Great soul food. Comfort you didn't know you needed. And one rule." She poked his chest lightly, teasing. "No suit. Come like a real person, not a headline." Richard laughed again, a genuine sound he hadn't heard from himself in a long while. No suit. Got it. For the first time in weeks, his world felt less like an empire to manage and more like a life worth living. The following evening, Richard arrived at the small soul food restaurant Miley had recommended. He left his suit at home, trading it for dark jeans and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. For once, he felt more like a man than an executive. Miley was already there, waving from a cozy booth tucked near the back. Her smile widened when she saw him, her curls bouncing as she leaned forward. "Look at you, no tie, no power jacket. I almost didn't recognize you." He grinned, sliding into the seat across from her. "You said no suit. I take instructions very seriously." The server brought tall glasses of sweet tea and menus that smelled faintly of fried chicken and cornbread. Miley glanced around the warm, bustling space. "This place has been here for decades. The food's amazing, and the portions could feed a small army." Richard picked up the menu, though his eyes kept flicking back to her. "What do you recommend?" "Fried catfish," she said without hesitation, "and collard greens. Oh, and the peach cobbler if you've got room." "Done," he replied, easily closing the menu. When the food arrived, the plates were generous and steaming, the aromas rich and comforting. Richard took his first bite and closed his eyes briefly. This is better than half the meals I've had at Michelin-starred restaurants." "Told you." Miley laughed, scooping up a forkful of macaroni and cheese. "Sometimes you just need food that tastes like it was made with love. It's grounding." They ate in comfortable rhythm, conversation slipping between light banter and deeper currents. Richard finally leaned back, his fork resting on the plate. "You asked me why I ended up on my deathbed. Truth? I don't know how to stop. My life's been measured in deals, deadlines, expectations. Somewhere along the way, I forgot what it felt like to rest." Miley's gaze softened. "Maybe your body had to force you to remember." He nodded slowly, her words sinking in. "Maybe. But I'm glad it happened, because it led me to you." Heat rose in her cheeks, but she smiled anyway. "Careful, Mr. Lewis. That sounds like one of the cheesy lines in my romance books," Richard chuckled, raising his glass toward hers. "Then consider this the first chapter." Their glasses clinked softly, a promise echoing louder than the crowded restaurant around them. The night air was cool as Richard and Miley stepped out of the restaurant, full plates replaced by lighter spirits. The street lamps cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and the distant hum of the city softened around them. Richard slipped his hands into his pockets, walking at her pace, unhurried for the first time in a long while. "You didn't have to. Walk me home," Miley said, though her smile betrayed she was glad he had. "Maybe not," Richard replied, glancing sideways at her, "but I wanted to. After everything, it feels right." They walked in companionable silence for a few blocks. Every so often their shoulders brushed, a quiet reminder of closeness neither had expected, but both welcomed. When they reached her building, Miley paused at the steps, looking up at him with warmth in her eyes. "I'm glad you're better," she said softly. "I'm glad you were there," Richard countered. His voice carried more weight than the casual words suggested. He hesitated, then added, "I owe you more than dinner. You stayed when no one else did." Miley shook her head gently. "You don't owe me. Just take care of yourself this time." "I'll try," he said, smiling faintly. "Good night, Miley." "Good night, Richard." He lingered until she disappeared into the building, then turned back toward his car. For the first time in weeks, his heart felt lighter, steady, not burdened by expectation. The feeling didn't last. The next morning, Eleanor Lewis was waiting at his townhouse, seated stiffly in the living room when he arrived. Her coat was draped neatly over the armrest, her expression composed but sharp. "You've been out gallivanting," she said as he walked in, her tone coolly accusatory. Meanwhile, You haven't been to the office once since leaving the hospital. The board is restless. Appearances matter, Richard. Richard set his keys down slowly, studying her. Appearances. That's all you ever care about. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. I care about the family name, about the empire we've built. People are watching, and weakness. Stop. Richard's voice cracked through the air, firmer than she'd expected. Do you even realize what you did? You kept Miley away from me. You erased the one person who actually cared when I was lying unconscious in that hospital bed. Eleanor's face hardened. She doesn't belong in our world. You were vulnerable, and she took advantage of that moment. I protected you. Richard laughed bitterly. Protected me? From what? From kindness? From someone who stayed when all of you treated me like a headline instead of a son? He stepped closer, anger simmering beneath his calm. She was there, reading to me, talking to me, while you and Michael argued about my reputation. That woman saved my life twice. Once, on the street, and again by reminding me I was human. She is beneath you, Eleanor snapped, her mask slipping for a fraction of a second. Richard's jaw tightened. No, she's exactly what I needed. And you're so consumed with control, you can't see that. The silence stretched, thick and brittle. Eleanor lifted her chin, voice cool once more. You'll regret this, Richard. Mark my words. He exhaled, steady and deliberate. The only thing I regret is letting you dictate my life for so long. That ends now. Eleanor's eyes flickered, but she said nothing further. She gathered her coat, her movement sharp, and swept out of the penthouse without another word. When the door shut, Richard leaned against it, the echo of the confrontation ringing in his chest. For the first time, he'd stood firm against her, and he knew exactly who had given him the strength to do it. Miley. The morning after his confrontation with Eleanor, Richard sat in his study, staring at the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. For years, those buildings had been markers of his success, trophies of deals won. Now they only looked like walls closing in. He reached for his phone, hesitating a moment before dialing a familiar number. Michael answered with guarded surprise. Richard? Yeah, Richard said, steady but tentative. Can you come by? I think we need to talk. Within the hour, Michael arrived, his usual armor of sarcasm left at the door. He dropped into the armchair across from Richard, studying him with a skeptical brow. What's on your mind? Richard leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I've been thinking a lot about everything. The collapse, the hospital, Mom. The truth is, I can't keep living like that. I nearly worked myself into the grave. He paused, his voice quieter. And part of me wonders if I was trying to prove something to you, to everyone. Michael blinked, surprised at the honesty. You don't have to prove anything to me, Rich. I've known all along you were the golden child. That was Mom's doing, not yours. His mouth twisted into a half-smile. I resented it, sure, but you didn't deserve the pedestal any more than I deserved to be in your shadow. Silence settled for a moment, thick but not hostile. Richard drew in a breath. I don't want the pedestal anymore. I can't run the company alone. I need someone who sees the blind spots I miss, and I think that's you. Michael's brows rose. You're asking me to help run Lewis and Hawthorne? I'm asking us to run it together, Richard clarified. Not as rivals, not as competitors, brothers, equal partners. For the first time in years, Michael's guarded expression cracked into something genuine. I never thought I'd hear you say that. Richard managed a small smile. Neither did I. Michael leaned back, exhaling slowly. All right, Rich, let's do it. But on one condition. Richard tilted his head. What's that? Michael smirked faintly. You don't keel over at your desk. I'm not picking up your slack. For the first time in a long while, Richard laughed. It wasn't forced or weary. It was real. And with it came the quiet promise of a new beginning. The fee. Next evening, Richard found himself back at Miley's door. This time, he carried no agenda, no rehearsed apology. When she opened the door, her expression softened instantly. "Richard," she said, stepping aside, "come in. You look lighter somehow." He chuckled, sliding his hands into his pockets. As he entered, "That's because I had a conversation I should have had years ago with my brother." Miley tilted her head, curiosity bright in her eyes. "Michael?" Richard nodded, settling onto her couch while she curled into the armchair opposite him. "I asked him to help me run the company, to be an actual partner. I've been carrying the weight of it all alone, trying to prove I could do it. But it nearly killed me. I don't want that life anymore." Miley smiled, warmth lighting her features. "That's huge and brave. Letting go of control isn't easy, especially for someone like you." "Someone like me?" Richard teased. She laughed softly. "The man who collapses in the rain because he thinks the world will stop spinning if he doesn't keep it on his own shoulders." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze steady on hers. "It won't stop anymore, not because of me, not because of Mom. I want balance. I want," he trailed off, his voice quiet, "I want a life worth living, and I think that starts with choosing differently." Her heart beat faster at the weight of his words, but she only nodded, grounding the moment. "Then you're already on the right track." Across town, Eleanor Lewis sat in her penthouse, the evening skyline reflected in the vast windows behind her. A glass of red wine in her hand, she read the email Michael had sent. His formal notice of co-leadership at Lewis and Hawthorne. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers tightening around the stem of the glass. Michael, Richard, united. It was the one scenario she had worked tirelessly to avoid. Her carefully maintained balance of power had crumbled overnight. "Foolish. Boys," she muttered, though the words rang hollow in the echo of the empty room. Her phone buzzed on the table. She ignored it, staring out at the city she had fought so long to control. Without their dependence, her influence would slip. And with that woman, Miley, lurking at the edges of Richard's life, Eleanor felt the foundations of her empire shifting beneath her feet. For the first time in decades, Eleanor Lewis felt something she despised. Powerless. Back in Miley's apartment, Richard leaned back against the couch, watching her as she spoke animatedly about her accounting clients, her laughter filling the room. He thought about the empire, about his family, about his mother's relentless grip. And then he thought about the storm, the rain, the collapse, and the woman who hadn't walked away. "Miley," he said, cutting gently into her story. "Thank you for not leaving me when everyone else had a reason to." She tilted her head, teasing. "Careful, Richard Lewis. That sounds like another line from one of my romance novels." "Then maybe," he said, his smile slow but certain, "it's time I start living one." Miley laughed. The next day, Richard sat across from Michael in the quiet of his penthouse study, papers spread across the desk between them. For once, the air wasn't thick with competition, but with cautious cooperation. "So," Michael began, tapping his pen against a notepad, "we divide responsibilities by strengths. You're the closer, the visionary. I'm better at the day-to-day. Operations, the grind no one notices but keeps the machine running." Richard nodded. "Agreed, and instead of fighting for control, we check egos at the door. We look at what's best for the company, not who gets the credit." Michael smirked faintly. "You sure you can handle not getting the spotlight?" Richard shot him a wry look. "Almost dying tends to put things in perspective. Besides, this isn't about spotlight, it's about survival." The brothers grew quiet, a rare mutual understanding hanging between them. Michael leaned back. "You know Mom will hate this. She'll try to pit us against each other again." "I know," Richard said firmly. "But for the first time, I don't care. We'll be stronger together than we ever were apart. She'll see that, eventually," Michael arched a brow. "Or she'll burn the house down trying to stop it." Richard didn't disagree. 2 nights later, Richard picked Miley up for their second date. They didn't go anywhere fancy. Instead, he drove her out to a quiet jazz club tucked into a side street, the kind of place where the lights were low, the tables intimate, and the music wrapped around you like velvet. "You're full of surprises," Miley teased as they settled into a booth. "Trying to keep up with you," Richard replied, grinning. They talked between songs, laughter easy, the conversation flowing, like it had years behind it instead of days. When dessert arrived, a shared slice of chocolate cake, Miley leaned in, her smile soft. "You know, you're not half as intimidating outside a suit," Richard chuckled. "And you're twice as dangerous when you smile like that." For a few hours, the world shrank down to the two of them, the music and the promise of something real. But promises were fragile things. The following morning, as Miley was walking into her office building, a sleek black car pulled up. The tinted window slid down, and Eleanor Lewis's face appeared, sharp, composed, commanding. Miley Carter. Her voice cut like glass. "Get in the car!" Miley froze, clutching her bag tighter. "Mrs. Lewis." "Sit," Eleanor ordered. Against her better judgment, Miley obeyed, sliding into the leather seat. The door shut with a soft thud that felt final. Eleanor regarded her coolly. "You will stay away from my son." Miley stiffened. "With respect, Richard is a grown man. He makes his own choices." Eleanor's smile was thin, humorless. "Choices have consequences. You see, I could make a phone call to your employer. A few carefully placed words, and your career here would vanish overnight. Do you really want to risk everything you've worked for on a passing infatuation?" Anger flared hot in Miley's chest, but she held Eleanor's gaze steadily. "It's not your decision to make." Eleanor leaned closer, her perfume sharp, her voice low and lethal. "Then make sure you think carefully, because I will not allow you to drag my son down." The car pulled to a stop outside Miley's office. Eleanor's final words echoed like a warning shot. "Consider this your only warning." Miley stepped out, her legs trembling, her heart pounding. She watched the car disappear into traffic, her mind racing. For the first time, she wondered if Richard's world was too dangerous for her heart, or if it was exactly where she was. Meant to be? Miley didn't waste time. That morning, after Eleanor's threat, she walked into her office with steady steps, though her stomach churned. Her boss looked up, surprised when she knocked and entered. "I need to report something," Miley said, voice firm, though her palms sweated. Within minutes, HR joined the meeting, their notepads ready. Miley explained everything, how Eleanor Lewis had intercepted her, the threats to her job, and the intimidation that left her shaken. "This kind of interference is unacceptable," HR assured her, their tone serious. "We'll escalate this internally. If necessary, we'll put protections in place for you." Her boss leaned forward, his expression supportive. "You've been a valuable part of this company for years, Miley. We're not letting outside influence dictate your position. In the meantime, we'll see if a work-from-home arrangement can minimize any potential conflict." Relief mixed with uncertainty as she left the meeting. She wasn't safe yet, but at least she had spoken her truth. That evening, sitting at her kitchen table, Miley typed out a text to Richard. "I need to tell you something about your mother. She threatens me. I could lose my job. I need space between us." His phone rang almost immediately after she hit send. "Miley!" His voice rushed through the line, low and urgent. "Please, don't run from this. Don't run from me." "I'm not running," she replied, her tone steady but tired. "I'm weighing my options. I told my boss what happened, and HR is involved. They may let me work from home for a while, but if Eleanor follows through on her threat and I lose my job, I'll need to find more clients to keep afloat." There was a pause. Then Richard said firmly, "If that happens, I'll help you find them. You won't face this alone." Her chest tightened at his words. "Thank you, but let's see how things unfold in the next few days. I need space to breathe, Richard, to think." He didn't argue, but his voice softened. Just don't shut me out. I want to fight for this, for us. I know, Miley whispered, and that means more than you realize. The next morning, Richard walked into his mother's penthouse unannounced. Eleanor was at the dining table, flipping through documents with her usual precision. She barely looked up. "Richard, you're late for the office again." He ignored, the jab pulling out a chair opposite her. "We need to talk about Miley." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "There's nothing to discuss. She doesn't belong in your world, I've made that clear." Richard leaned forward, his voice calm but edged with steel. "And I'm making this clear. If you keep interfering, I will walk away from the company, effective immediately." Eleanor's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "Don't be absurd. You wouldn't throw away decades of legacy for a woman you barely know." Richard held her gaze, unwavering. "I would, because she's the one who was there when I collapsed in the street. She's the one who read to me when I was unconscious. She's the one who reminded me I was human, not just a name on a building. I like her, Mom. More than that, I respect her. And I'm not letting her go because you think she isn't worthy." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "You're being reckless, sentimental." "No," Richard said firmly, standing, now towering over her. "For the first time, I'm being honest. You will not decide who belongs in my life anymore. If you keep trying, you'll lose me, not just as your son, but as the man running your empire." Silence stretched. Eleanor's face remained composed, but her eyes betrayed the first flicker of uncertainty. Richard picked up his coat and turned toward the door. "I won't let you destroy this." The door shut behind him, with a finality that left Eleanor staring at the untouched documents, her grip on control slipping like sand through her fingers. 2 days without hearing from Miley had left Richard restless, pacing his penthouse like a caged animal. Every hour felt heavier, every unanswered thought sharper. Finally, just before dusk, he grabbed his keys and drove straight to her apartment. He couldn't wait anymore. When Miley opened the door, she wasn't surprised. Her expression was calm, expectant, as though she had known he would come. "Come in," she said quietly, stepping aside. Richard entered, his tall frame filling the small space, but he didn't sit. Instead, he stood close, his presence warm and insistent. "I told my mother to leave you alone," he said, his voice low but steady. "I told her if she didn't, I would walk away from the company." Miley arched a brow, folding her arms. "Good bluff. Did she buy it?" Richard shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "It's not a bluff. You're important to me. I'm not letting this go unless you say something different." The words hung heavy in the air. Miley searched his face, looking for cracks, for the familiar shield of charm or businesslike deflection. "I'm waiting on the joke," she murmured at last, half defensive, half hopeful. Richard stepped closer, his tone soft but unyielding. "This is not a joke." Before she could reply, he leaned down, his breath brushing against her cheek. Hesitation melted as Miley tilted upward, their lips meeting in a kiss that was gentle at first, then deepened as though both had been holding back for far too long. When they parted, the walls around them seemed lighter, less suffocating. Miley let out a shaky laugh, pressing her forehead against his. "You're impossible." "Persistent," Richard corrected, a smile tugging at his lips. They moved to the couch, and for the first time since fate threw them together in the storm, they let the night unfold without fear or expectation. Conversation flowed easily, stories from childhood, dreams unspoken, even jokes about his mother's diamond-studded disapproval. They laughed until their sides hurt, then grew quiet, the silence filled with comfort instead of distance. By the time dawn painted soft light across her living room, Miley was curled against him, her laughter fading into a sigh of contentment. Richard brushed a curl from her face, marveling at how right it felt. For once, neither numbers nor empires weighed on them. Just two people, awake until morning, building something real. A month passed, and Richard and Miley had slipped into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Late dinners at cozy spots, quiet evenings with her reading aloud while he actually listened, mornings where she teased him about his inability to cook more than scrambled eggs. The storm that had brought them together now felt like a distant memory, replaced by a steady strength neither of them had expected, but both cherished. But Eleanor Lewis was not a woman easily deterred. Richard arrived at his office one Thursday to find his mother sitting in the conference room with a young woman in a chic navy dress. Eleanor rose smoothly as he entered, her tone crisp. "Richard, darling, this is Isabel Turner. Her father is one of our firm's most important partners. Isabel is brilliant, accomplished, and mother." His voice cut like glass, cold and sharp. He turned to the woman, offering a brief, polite nod. "It was inconsiderate of my mother to put you in this position. My apologies, but I am not available." Isabel flushed, murmured something awkward, and excused herself quickly, leaving Eleanor alone with her son. "Really, Richard?" Eleanor said with a sigh, smoothing the lapel of her tailored blazer. "You cannot expect me to sit idly by while you entangle yourself with a woman who doesn't belong in this world. Miley may amuse you, but she will not last. Isabel, however, comes from strength, connections, stability." Richard's jaw clenched. He had tried patience. He had tried reason, but now he was done. "Stop it, mother. No more blind dates, no more schemes. Miley is my choice." Eleanor raised an elegant brow, unruffled. "Then have her over for dinner. Let me see this woman you've decided to throw away your legacy for." "No." The single word carried the weight of steel. Richard stepped closer, his voice low but dangerous. "That's not happening, and this is my last warning." "Eleanor's," smile faltered. "Richard." He cut her off, the restraint in his tone barely holding back his fury. "Don't interfere with my relationship with Miley. Don't go near her job, her family, her friends, or anything connected to her. Do you understand me? If you do, if you so much as breathe in her direction, we are done." "Done, mother. That's not a threat, that's a promise." Silence filled the room. For once, Eleanor had no ready retort, no polished response. She studied him carefully as though she didn't recognize the man standing before her. Richard's eyes burned with conviction. "This is my life, my choice. You've dictated enough of it already. But not this, not her. If you can't respect that, then you can consider our relationship over, personally and professionally." Eleanor's lips parted, then pressed into a tight line. She adjusted the cuffs of her blazer, her composure cracking for the first time. "You think you're stronger than me now," she murmured, her voice brittle. Richard didn't flinch. "No, I'm stronger without you." He turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving her alone, the echo of his words ringing louder than her silence. That evening, Richard sat across from Miley in their favorite cafe. He didn't tell her about Isabel or the confrontation. He didn't want to taint their moment with his mother's schemes. Instead, he simply reached across the table and took her hand. "This," he said softly, "is what matters. Us." Miley squeezed his fingers gently, her eyes warm. "Then let's keep building it." For the first time in years, Richard felt free. A few days later, Miley stirred her tea slowly, her eyes fixed on the swirl of steam. Richard sat across from her in the quiet corner of her apartment, his shoulders heavy, though he was trying to mask it. She'd seen it before, the faint tightness around his mouth, the way he rubbed the back of his neck as if carrying an invisible weight. "You're somewhere else tonight," she said gently. Richard blinked, pulling himself back. "I'm here." Miley gave him a look, one that cut past the polished charm he wore like armor. "No, Richard, you're not. You're fighting battles in your head, battles with your mother." His silence confirmed it. She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Are you truly ready to stand against her? Because if you aren't, she'll keep coming for us, for me, for anything she thinks threatens her control. Richard met her gaze, the question settling heavy between them. He wanted to give her the easy answer, the one that would reassure, but Miley deserved the truth. "I'm ready," he said at last, his voice low but certain. "For once in my life, I'm ready to stop being her son who obeys and start being my own man. If that means burning bridges, so be it." Miley studied him, searching for cracks in his conviction. Finding none, she gave his hand a small squeeze. "Then I'll stand with you. Just don't leave me in the dark." The next morning, Richard met Michael at the office. They closed themselves into the boardroom, the city sprawling out beyond, the glass walls. Michael raised a brow at his brother's drawn expression. "You look like you wrestled a dragon." "Close," Richard muttered. He told Michael everything about Eleanor's continued interference, the attempted setups, the threats against Miley, and the ultimatum he had given their mother. Michael whistled low. "You really dropped the gauntlet." "I had to," Richard said, leaning against the edge of the table. "But I need you to know, if she pushes back harder, I may not stay. You may need to take full responsibility for the company." Michael frowned. "Walk away from all this? Are you serious?" Richard's mouth curved into a small smile, not bitter, but resolute. "If it comes down to choosing between the company and my life with Miley, I'll choose her. Every time. I've already nearly died for this empire once. I won't do it again." Michael leaned back, arms crossed, his eyes narrowing as he measured his brother. "So what would you do if she goes too far?" Richard's answer came without hesitation. "Build something for myself, from the ground up, with Miley if she chooses to be a part of it." For a long moment, Michael said nothing. Then slowly, a grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You know, that doesn't sound half bad. But if I'm running Lewis and Hawthorne alone, I'll need more than ambition. Maybe someone who isn't poisoned by Mom's constant meddling." Richard tilted his head. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "Clara," Michael said, naming their youngest sibling. "She's smart. She's been hiding in the background too long. Maybe it's time she steps up." Richard chuckled softly. "She'd probably do a better job than either of us. And she's the only one Mom underestimates enough not to crush." With pressure, Michael's expression grew more serious. "If this turns into war, Rich, I'll need both of you. But more than that, you need to decide if you're ready to let go of the empire Mom worships more than her family." Richard nodded slowly. "I already decided." That night, when Richard returned to Miley's apartment, he carried not just the weight of choice, but also the quiet freedom of a man who had finally begun to shape his own future, and for the first time, the future felt like his. For the first time in years, Richard, Michael, and Clara sat together without their mother orchestrating the seating or directing the conversation. They had chosen a quiet cafe instead of a boardroom, away from Eleanor's shadow, the kind of place where strategy could be discussed without fear of interruption. Richard leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "I've been thinking, what if we all work together, truly together? No more letting Mom divide us, no more letting her decide who matters. We decide." Clara blinked, startled. She had grown accustomed to being the invisible sibling, the one Eleanor never considered, capable of more than polite appearances. "You want me with you?" Richard smiled, the weight in his eyes softening. "Yes, you have that marketing degree, Clara. You've got ideas Mom never gave you the space to share. It's time you put them to work, for our company, not just for her approval." Clara's lips curved into the faintest smile, a mix of pride and disbelief. "You really mean it?" "I do," Richard said firmly. Michael tapped his pen against his coffee cup, his expression thoughtful. "Here's an idea. What if we make this official, go to Mom, and ask for 1 year? 1 year where the three of us prove we can run the company together. But she has to agree. No interference in our personal lives or our professional decisions. She either gives us the space or risks losing Richard completely. Clara looked between them, doubt flickering in her eyes. You think she'll go for that? She doesn't give up control easily. Michael's mouth twisted into a wry grin. She'll go for it if she realizes the alternative is worse. Without us, the empire she worships will crack. Clara hesitated before asking, "And what's your part in all this, Michael?" He leaned back, confidence settling into his voice. "I'll handle overseas business. It'll keep Richard from running back and forth across continents, burning himself out again. And it shows Mom, we're serious about dividing responsibilities. Logically, not emotionally." Richard nodded, determination steady in his voice. "Then it's settled. We'll put our plan together and present it to her this weekend." Clara exhaled slowly, her nerves giving way to resolve. For once, she wasn't a bystander. She was part of the pact, and together, the Lewis siblings would face their mother as a united front. Miley sat curled up on her couch, a blanket draped across her lap, when Richard knocked at her door. She opened it to find him standing there, his expression a mix of determination and uncertainty. "You've got that look," she said, stepping aside so he could come in. "The one that says you've been plotting something?" He chuckled softly as he set his coat over the back of a chair. "You're not wrong. Michael, Clara, and we've made a pact. We're going to confront my mother this weekend. You're three of us together, united." Miley sank onto the couch, studying him carefully. "That's bold. What exactly are you asking for?" "A year," Richard explained, taking the seat beside her. "1 year to prove we can run the company. Ourselves, free from her interference, professionally or personally. If she agrees, we finally get the space we've needed. If she doesn't—" He trailed off, his jaw tightening. Miley tilted her head. "If she doesn't, then what?" Richard turned to her fully, his eyes searching hers. "Then I walk away. And I don't mean just leaving the boardroom for a few weeks. I mean done. I'd build something new, something mine, something ours, if you'd want to be part of it." Her breath caught at the weight of his words. "Richard!" "I'm serious, Miley." His voice was steady but vulnerable in a way she rarely heard. "You've seen me at my weakest. You've seen the damage this empire has done to me. I can't keep living like that. If this pact fails, I want a fresh start. With you, if you'll have me." Miley sat back, processing. She thought of Eleanor's threats, the pressure of the Lewis name, the shadows that came with loving him. But she also thought of nights filled with laughter, of the storm that had first brought him crashing into her life, of the way he looked at her as if she were the one solid thing in a chaotic world. "You're asking a lot," she said finally, her tone soft but honest. "I know," Richard admitted, "but I'd rather ask than pretend I don't need you in this." Miley reached out, her hand covering his. "Then let's see what happens this weekend. And if it doesn't work, we'll figure out what comes next. Together." For the first time in days, Richard's shoulders eased, and a smile tugged at his lips. Together, that's all I need to hear. The Lewis siblings sat in their mother's sprawling dining room, the polished mahogany table gleaming beneath the chandelier. Lunch had been civil, too civil, like everyone was waiting for the storm that usually followed Eleanor Lewis's presence. When the dishes were cleared, Richard pushed his chair back slightly, signaling it was time. "Mother," he began evenly, "we need to speak with you, together." Eleanor's sharp eyes shifted from son to son, then to her youngest daughter. "This sounds rehearsed." Michael leaned forward, folding his arms on the table. "Because it is. We're serious about this. The three of us want to run the company, together without interference. For 1 year, you give us full control, personally and professionally. If we fail, then you can have your say. But if we succeed, then you step back permanently." Clara nodded, her voice steady, though her hands fidgeted in her lap. You've underestimated me for years, Mother, but I have skills to bring to the table. We all do. This isn't a whim, it's a plan. Eleanor tilted her head, studying them like a chess player staring down her opponents. You expect me to hand over the empire your father and I built on nothing but a promise? No, Richard said firmly. We're asking you to let us prove ourselves. You raised us to be strong, to carry this legacy. Let us do it. Without you trying to pull every string. The silence was taut. Eleanor's fingers tapped against her wineglass, her expression unreadable. Finally, she said, I will think on it. The idea of all my children working together is appealing, but removing my input entirely? Her lips pressed into a thin line. That is something to consider. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't rejection either. For the Lewis siblings, that alone was progress. Later that evening, Miley rang Richard's doorbell. He opened the door almost instantly, as if he'd been waiting for her, his shoulders visibly lighter. The meeting was civil. He told her, as they settled into his living room, that alone feels like a miracle. She's going to think about it. I don't know what her answer will be, but for now, there's a sliver of hope. Miley smiled faintly, curling her legs beneath her on the couch. That sounds like more progress than you've had in years. Richard nodded, then grew quiet. His hands rubbed against his knees, restless. Finally, he turned to her, his expression stripped of the usual confidence. But that's not why I asked you to come tonight. Miley's heart quickened. Oh? He took a breath, steadying himself. I want this, what we have, to be more. I don't mean stolen moments and late dinners. I mean a serious relationship. I'm in love with you, Miley. I don't want to push you, but I need to know where I stand with you. The words hung heavy in the air, more vulnerable than any boardroom confession. Miley's eyes softened as she leaned closer, her hands resting gently on his chest. She could feel the thud of his heart beneath her palms, fast and strong. Richard Lewis, she said quietly, a smile tugging at her lips. You're not the only one. I'm in love with you too. Relief washed over his face, followed by a joy he hadn't dared hope for. He closed the distance, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was tender, reverent, and full of promise. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his, whispering, So, now, you know where you stand. He laughed softly, pulling her closer. I do, and I'm never letting go. The summons came 3 days later. Eleanor Lewis called not just Richard, Michael, and Clara, but also Miley. The message was brief, almost startling in its civility. Join me for dinner. We will eat, then talk business. Richard read the words twice before showing them to Miley, his brow furrowed with worry. She's never invited someone from outside to the family meeting like this. Not once. Miley, ever steady, simply placed her hand over his. Then maybe she's finally listening. When they arrived at Eleanor's penthouse, the tension was palpable. The dining room glittered with polished silverware and crystal glasses, the long mahogany table set with precision. Eleanor stood at the head of it, composed as always, but there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Welcome, she said evenly, her gaze sweeping over her children before lingering, just briefly on Miley. Let's eat first. We'll speak afterward. The meal was elaborate, but for once, Eleanor didn't dominate the conversation. She asked Clara about her current projects, listened as Michael spoke about the overseas accounts, and even nodded politely when Miley mentioned her accounting work for local businesses. Her questions weren't pointed or cutting, merely curious. Richard, seated beside Miley, watched with cautious relief. Every polite word, every measured glance toward the woman he loved felt like a small victory. After the plates were cleared and coffee poured, Eleanor folded her hands and looked down the length of the table. Now business. The siblings stiffened instinctively, bracing themselves. Eleanor's voice was calm, but uncharacteristically gentle. I've thought about your proposal, about giving you 1 year to prove you can run Lewis and Hawthorne together. I admit, it is not easy for me to let go. This company has been my life for decades, but it is also your legacy, and I need to allow you to step into your own." Michael let out a quiet breath, glancing at Richard and Clara. Clara's eyes widened in cautious hope. Richard leaned forward. "So, you agree?" Eleanor inclined her head. "I do. 1 year, full authority, no interference from me." The silence that followed was thick with disbelief. For once, Eleanor's words carried no hidden barbs, no manipulations, just reluctant acceptance. Then her gaze shifted to Miley. "And there is something else. I know I've made my feelings about you clear, Miss Carter. I cannot pretend I am comfortable watching my son give his heart so freely, especially to someone outside the world I've built. But—" She paused, the admission seeming to cost. "I see that he is in love with you. I cannot change that, so I will try, for peace, for him, for this family." Miley's heart pounded, but she met Eleanor's gaze steadily. "Thank you for being honest. I know it isn't easy for you, but I respect that you're willing to try." Richard reached beneath the table, squeezing Miley's hand. His chest swelled with quiet pride. This was the first time his mother had acknowledged her, not as a threat, but as part of his life. Eleanor's eyes flicked toward her son, catching the silent exchange. For a moment her expression softened, the faintest crack in her armor. "Then, let us move forward together," she said at last. For the first time in years, the Lewis family left the table not as opponents, but as something closer to allies. And beside Richard sat Miley, no longer an outsider, but a woman with a seat at the table. The year that followed was nothing short of extraordinary. Richard, Michael, and Clara threw themselves into the company with renewed purpose, each playing to their strengths. Richard handled major deals with vision and precision. Michael stabilized the overseas operations, and Clara breathed fresh life into the company's branding and marketing. By the end of the first quarter, profits had risen. By summer, the press began praising the next generation of Lewis leadership. And by winter, even Eleanor Lewis herself, once the fiercest critic, had begun to brag about her exceptional children. "These three," she told investors at a holiday gala, her glass of champagne raised high, "are proof that legacy, when nurtured, can bloom stronger than ever." Richard listened from across the room, his arm draped over Miley's shoulders, marveling at how far they had come. Richard took Miley to Tony's pizzeria exactly 1 year after Miley had found him collapsed. On that rain-soaked sidewalk, Richard took her back to that very spot. The pizzeria was still there, Tony waving from inside as they passed, but Richard guided her to the corner where fate had first intervened. "Miley Carter," he began, holding her hands, "this is where my life nearly ended. But because of you, it became the place where my life truly began." He dropped to one knee, pulling out a velvet box. "Will you marry me?" Tears blurred her vision as she laughed through her shock. "Of course, yes." She pulled him up into her arms, their kiss sealing the promise. To everyone's surprise, the loudest cheer for their engagement came from Eleanor. "I've been waiting over 40 years to do this," Eleanor declared days later, already on the phone with caterers and florists. She strode through her estate like a general leading an army, directing planners and decorators with more energy than anyone had seen in years. Richard watched her in disbelief as she sketched out seating charts and debated flower arrangements. "Mother, you don't have to—" "Nonsense," Eleanor cut him off, adjusting her glasses. "If my son is marrying, it will be the event of the season. Miley deserves nothing less." Miley, standing nearby, blinked in surprise. Eleanor had called her by name. Not that woman, not Richard's friend. And later, when Eleanor introduced her to a seamstress, she went further. "This is my daughter," she said with pride. The word hit Miley's heart like sunlight. breaking through storm clouds. Daughter, acceptance. 6 months later, the wedding took place on Eleanor's sprawling estate in late spring, when the gardens were alive with blooms and the air was warm but gentle. Rows of white chairs stretched across the lawn, a canopy of blossoms arching above the altar. Guests murmured with delight, cameras flashed, and the Lewis siblings stood proudly at Richard's side. As Miley walked down the aisle in a gown of ivory lace, her curls pinned back with delicate pearls, Richard's breath caught in his throat. He had faced boardroom wars, his mother's wrath, and his own near destruction. But nothing compared to the overwhelming certainty that this woman was his home. When the vows were spoken and the kiss sealed their union, applause thundered through the estate. Eleanor dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, whispering to the woman beside her, "My son chose well. He chose love." That night, as lanterns lit the gardens and music filled the air, Richard and Miley danced beneath the stars, surrounded by family, by peace, and by the legacy they were building together. For Richard Lewis, the empire no longer felt like a burden. It was simply a foundation, one he would share with his wife, his siblings, and even at last his mother. And for Miley, the woman who once only wanted to help small businesses balance their books, life had come full circle. The storm that had started it all had cleared, leaving behind a horizon filled with promise. The wedding had changed more than Richard and Miley's lives. It had shifted the entire Lewis family. For the first time, there was space for love, compromise, and a new kind of legacy. Eleanor, who once viewed Miley as an intruder, surprised everyone by inviting her to take on a vital role in the family's charitable foundation. "If you're going to be my daughter," she had said with a regal tilt of her chin, "then you'll do more than sit at the table. You'll help lead." Miley accepted, becoming both the foundation's lead accountant and a guiding voice for its mission. She balanced the books with precision, but also brought heart into the process, ensuring the money reached causes that mattered. Eleanor, once obsessed only with empire and appearances, began to see philanthropy through Miley's eyes, not just as reputation building, but as a way to leave a kinder footprint. Michael, no longer overshadowed, found himself thriving as the company's overseer of international operations. During a trip to London, he met Elise, a journalist with a quick wit and fearless nature. For the first time, he let someone in without feeling the need to measure himself against his younger brother. Clara, meanwhile, blossomed in her marketing role. Her ideas not only rebranded the company's image, but also captured the attention of Thomas, a graphic designer who admired her creativity. Their romance unfolded quietly, steady and strong, with Eleanor offering only smiles instead of criticism. Richard, perhaps, had undergone the most profound change. Once defined by endless hours at the office, he now understood the value of balance. With Miley's grounding influence, he learned to step away from the desk, to savor evenings, laughter, and the simple joy of being present. Children became the next dream. Miley admitted she had once imagined a quieter life, but standing beside Richard, she was ready to embrace the idea of extending their family. To her surprise, Eleanor became her most unexpected ally. "I've made mistakes," Eleanor confessed one evening as she helped Miley fold tiny baby clothes in preparation for the nursery. "But I want to be the kind of grandmother who shows up with love, not demands." Miley smiled, touched by the vulnerability in her voice. "That's all we could ever ask for." In the years that followed, the Lewis estate filled with new laughter. Board meetings gave way to family dinners, where business talk was secondary to stories from school plays and overseas adventures. Eleanor still carried her regal presence, but her sharp edges softened. Instead of trying to control her children's choices, she began to celebrate them. One spring afternoon, much like the day of the wedding, the family gathered on the estate lawn. Children played among the flower beds. Clara and Thomas laughed over picnic baskets. Michael and Elise exchanged stories from their travels. And Eleanor sat in a chair beneath the shade of a great oak, a grandchild nestled in her lap. Richard slipped, an arm around Miley's waist, pulling her close. "We made it," he whispered, his voice warm with gratitude. Miley looked around at the family that had once been fractured but was now whole. "Yes," she said softly, smiling. "We did." And as the sun dipped low over the estate, the Lewis family embraced their new legacy, not one of control and division, but of love, unity, and a future filled with hope. The end. Hope you enjoyed this wonderful story by Green Tea Tales. Help. Support our channel with like, comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.